The Traveler Series. Episode 2. Part 2, Dark Desire.
Chapter 3. The River Priestess. The journey to Nigeria was long, but Cynthia was determined. She had told Rodney that the trip was for charity work, and he had accepted her explanation without question. As much as he loved his wife, he was preoccupied with the upcoming elections and the constant demands of his position. Cynthia, for her part, was grateful for the distance between them. It made it easier to keep her secret. Sade and Cynthia left for the airport together, and when they arrived Lagos, they travelled to a remote village on the outskirts of the city in Badagry, a place known for its ancient times of slave trade. The village was a world away from the bustling metropolis of Lagos, a place where time seemed to stand still. The streets were unpaved, and the air was thick with the scent of burning wood and spices. Children played in the dusty streets, their laughter a stark contrast to the solemnity of Cynthia's mission. The river priestess lived in a small, thatched hut on the edge of the village, near the banks of a wide, slow-moving river. The hut was surrounded by lush vegetation, and the sound of the river flowing over rocks was soothing, almost hypnotic. As Cynthia and Shade approached, the door of the hut opened, and an old woman stepped out. The priestess was ancient, her skin wrinkled and dark as ebony. She wore a simple white wrapper, and her hair was tied back in a neat bun. Her eyes, however, were sharp and clear, betraying a wisdom that came from years of communion with the spirits. "Sad," the priestess greeted, her voice strong despite her age. "It has been many years. What brings you back to my river?" "I have brought a friend, Mother," Shade replied, her tone respectful. "She is in need of your help." The priestess's gaze shifted to Cynthia, and for a moment she said, "You brought an oyimbo to me." Cynthia felt a chill run down her spine as those piercing eyes seemed to see right through her. Then the priestess nodded. "Come," she said simply, turning and disappearing into the hut. Cynthia hesitated, but Shade gently urged her forward. Inside, the hut was dimly lit, with the scent of incense hanging heavy in the air. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars and bottles, each containing mysterious herbs and powders. In the center of the room was a low table, covered with a white cloth. On the table lay a small bundle, wrapped in a white cloth. The priestess motioned for Cynthia to sit, and she did so, her heart pounding in her chest. The old woman began to speak in a low, rhythmic tone, her words in a language Cynthia did not understand. She moved around the room, gathering various items and placing them on the table.
A bowl of water, a bundle of dried leaves, a small, intricately carved wooden idol. When the preparations were complete, the priestess turned to Cynthia. "You have come seeking a child," she said, her voice low and serious. "Yes," Cynthia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The spirits have heard your plea," the priestess continued. "But you must understand, the child you seek will not be like any other. He will come from a place beyond this world, and he will carry with him a great power. But with that power comes a price." Cynthia swallowed hard, her mind racing. She didn't fully understand what the priestess was saying, but she knew she had come too far to turn back now. "I'm willing to pay any price," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I just want to be a mother." The priestess nodded, her expression grave. "Very well," she said. "You must follow my instructions carefully. Tonight, at midnight, you will go to the riverbank. There, you will tie this white wrapper around your waist and stand in the water. I will call upon the spirits to bring you the child you desire." Cynthia took the white wrapper from the priestess, her hands shaking. "What will happen?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. "The spirits will guide you," the priestess replied. "But remember, they are not bound by our world. They will give you what you seek, but they will also take something in return. Be prepared, for the journey you are about to embark on will change your life forever." That night, as the moon hung low in the sky, Cynthia and Shade made their way to the riverbank. The air was cool and still, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of the water against the shore.
Cynthia's heart raced as she tied the white wrapper around her waist and waded into the river. The water was cold, sending a shiver through her body. She stood there waist deep as the priestess began to chant, her voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. The words were foreign to Cynthia, but they seemed to resonate deep within her, as if they were reaching into her very soul. As the chanting grew louder, a rough gathering of dark winds traveled swiftly into the skies, and in a matter of moments ported from Earth to the Pegasus galaxy. There the dark winds conferred with Echo, if he was willingly to be born of Earth and live his life to their service. Like his father, Echo was too hasty. All he could think of was his dream of dominating on Earth and becoming the master of the universe. He never really asked the dark winds what were the terms of his service once he was born. Echo agreed, and the dark winds ported his essence in its dark state to Earth. Then down they went to where Cynthia was with the priestess. All these happened within a few minutes. Cynthia felt a strange sensation in her womb, a tingling, almost electric feeling that spread through her entire body. She gasped, her hands clutching her abdomen as the sensation intensified. For a moment, she felt as if she were floating, her consciousness drifting away from her physical form. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sensation ceased. The chanting stopped, and the priestess's voice cut through the silence. "It is done," she said, her tone final. "The spirits have answered your call." Cynthia staggered out of the water, her legs weak and trembling. Shade rushed to her side, helping her to the shore. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I think so," Cynthia replied, her mind reeling from the experience. She placed a hand on her abdomen, feeling the faintest of movements beneath her skin. A sense of awe and fear washed over her. "I felt something inside me. The child has been placed within you," the priestess said, her voice calm. "But remember, this child is not like any other. He carries with him a power that comes from beyond this world. You must be prepared for what lies ahead."
Cynthia nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, but she felt a sense of satisfaction knowing it was a boy. As they made their way back to the village, she couldn't help but wonder what she had just done, and what the future held for her and the child now growing inside her. Chapter 4: Politics and Compromise. Back in Washington, Senator Rodney was deep in the throes of the political battle that was his life. The Republican Party was gearing up for the 1992 presidential elections, and Rodney, along with his close ally Senator Joseph Flanagan, was at the forefront of the party's efforts to solidify their platform. The political landscape was fraught with challenges, rising tensions in the Middle East, economic uncertainty, and a growing divide between the liberal and conservative factions within the government. The evening was in full swing as Senator Rodney entered the grand ballroom of the Mayflower Hotel, one of Washington, D.C.'s most prestigious venues. The Republican fundraising gala was a high-profile event, drawing politicians, business moguls, and influential donors from across the country. The air buzzed with the hum of conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the quiet murmur of deals being made in the corners of the room. Rodney was dressed impeccably in a classic black tuxedo, his demeanor as calm and collected as ever. He moved through the crowd with ease, exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces, shaking hands with potential donors, and keeping a watchful eye on the proceedings. This was his world, and he navigated it with the confidence and skill of a seasoned politician. As he made his way toward the bar, something caught his eye: his close friend and ally, Senator Joseph Flanagan, standing off to the side in deep conversation with a group of men Rodney didn't recognize. The men were sharply dressed, but there was something about them that set off alarm bells in Rodney's mind. They carried themselves with a certain air of arrogance, and their eyes seemed too calculating, too shrewd. Rodney watched them for a moment, his instincts telling him that something wasn't right. He had known Flanagan for years, and while he respected his colleague's strong convictions and fiery rhetoric, he also knew that Flanagan wasn't above making deals when it suited him. But these men, Rodney couldn't shake the feeling that they were the kind of people who expected too much in return for their support. As Flanagan finished his conversation and the men moved away, Rodney took the opportunity to approach him. "Joe," Rodney called out, his tone light but with an undercurrent of seriousness. Flanagan turned, a broad smile on his face. "Rodney! Good to see you. Enjoying the party?" Rodney returned the smile, though his mind was elsewhere. "It's quite the event, as always. But I couldn't help noticing you talking to some unfamiliar faces. Who were those gentlemen?" Flanagan's smile faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, just some new donors. They're interested in supporting our campaign efforts. Nothing to worry about." Rodney wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Joe, I've been in this game long enough to know when something doesn't add up. Those men, who are they, really? And what do they want in return for their support?" Flanagan's expression hardened slightly, a shadow passing over his eyes. But he maintained his friendly demeanor, clapping Rodney on the shoulder. "Rodney, you worry too much. These are just businessmen looking to make a contribution to our cause. It's all above board." Rodney didn't budge. "We've built our careers on integrity and transparency. If there's something more going on here, I need to know." Flanagan's smile tightened, his patience wearing thin. "Look, Rodney, I appreciate your concern, but you're making a mountain out of a molehill. I've got this under control. Trust me." Rodney searched his friend's face, trying to read the truth behind the polished exterior. He had known Flanagan long enough to sense when something was off, and right now, all his instincts were telling him that Flanagan was hiding something. But this wasn't the time or place to press the issue further. Rodney nodded slowly, though his unease remained. "All right, Joe. But just remember, we've got a reputation to uphold. I'd hate for anything to jeopardize that." Flanagan's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You've got nothing to worry about, Rodney. We're in this together, remember?" Rodney forced a smile in return, but as he watched Flanagan walk away, the doubt lingered. Something about those men didn't sit right with him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Flanagan was getting involved with the wrong people. As the night wore on, Rodney continued to mingle with the guests, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that brief conversation. He knew he would have to keep an eye on Flanagan, both for his friend's sake and for the sake of their shared political future. Meanwhile, Cynthia had returned from Nigeria with a secret that weighed heavily on her heart. The ritual performed by the river priestess had been a success. She was pregnant. But the circumstances of her pregnancy were shrouded in mystery and fear. She had not told Rodney about the ritual, fearing his reaction, and now she carried a child unlike any other within her womb. Chapter 5: Dark Desires and Shifting Loyalties. It had been a few weeks earlier, in the midst of the campaign's intense whirlwind, when Cynthia found out she was pregnant. The realization had filled her with a mix of emotions, excitement, anxiety, and a deep, almost overwhelming sense of responsibility. She knew that this pregnancy was different, that the child she carried was special, even before the river priestess's warnings. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of campaign events, Rodney returned home late. He was tired, his suit slightly rumpled, and his mind was still buzzing with thoughts of strategy and polling numbers. Cynthia had been waiting for him in the living room, sitting quietly with a cup of tea, her hands resting on her belly. When Rodney walked in, Cynthia stood up and met him with a warm smile. "Rodney, there's something I need to tell you." Rodney's brow furrowed slightly with concern, but he nodded, setting his briefcase down and giving her his full attention. "What is it, Cynthia?" She took a deep breath, her heart pounding with the significance of what she was about to say. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, Rodney simply stared at her, the words taking a second to register. Then his eyes widened, and a broad smile spread across his face. "You're pregnant?" "Cynthia, that's amazing." He stepped forward, pulling her into a tight embrace, his joy palpable. "This is the best news I've heard in months," Rodney said, his voice filled with genuine happiness. "A baby, our baby." Cynthia hugged him back, relief washing over her. She had been nervous about how he would react, given the pressures of the campaign, but his excitement was clear and genuine. "I'm so glad you're happy, Rodney. I was a little worried about the timing, with everything going on." Rodney pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes with a reassuring smile. "The timing isn't perfect, but it doesn't matter. This is a blessing, Cynthia. We've always wanted a family, and now it's happening." Cynthia nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. But even as they celebrated the news together, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that this pregnancy was more than just the start of their family, it was the beginning of something much larger, something she couldn't yet fully understand. Cynthia began to have strange dreams that almost seemed real. The dreams started almost immediately when she got back from Nigeria. In these dreams, a creature, dark and indistinct, would come to her at night. It would press against her, touch her, enter her in her. This left her both terrified and inexplicably aroused. When she woke, she felt an overwhelming urge to have sex, but not with Rodney. One morning, as she stood in the kitchen making coffee, the handyman, Joe, arrived to fix a leaky faucet. Joe was a ruggedly handsome man, with a charming smile and a way about him that made Cynthia feel at ease. As she watched him work, she felt that familiar stirring within her, the same desire that had plagued her since the dreams began. She could feel an itch in between her legs, and a wetness she almost could not control. Joe glanced up and caught her staring. "Everything okay, Mrs. Rodney?" Cynthia blinked, snapping out of her reverie. "Yes, sorry. Just lost in thought." Joe smiled. "Well, if there's anything you need, just let me know." The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. Cynthia knew she was on dangerous ground. She could feel the desire rising, threatening to consume her. She wanted him, wanted to give in to the dark urges that had been building inside her. But at the last moment, she managed to pull herself back. "Thank you, Joe," she said, her voice steady. "I appreciate your help." As Joe finished his work and left, Cynthia let out a long, shaky breath. She had come so close, too close. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't betray Rodney, not like this. But deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time. Cynthia stood in the grocery store aisle a day after the incident with Joe, staring at the shelf as she reached for a can of soup. Her mind was preoccupied, as it often was these days, with the strange dreams that had plagued her since she became pregnant. She had pushed the dreams aside, telling herself they were just her mind playing tricks on her, but they were becoming harder to ignore. As she grabbed the can, a sharp voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you just going to stand there all day?" The woman who spoke was tall and impeccably dressed, her tone dripping with condescension. Cynthia blinked, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't see you there." The woman scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Clearly. Some of us have places to be, you know." A rush of anger flared in Cynthia's chest, hotter than anything she'd felt before. She stared at the woman, her mind buzzing with a sudden, irrational thought. "I wish you'd just get hit by a car." The thought was fleeting, and Cynthia dismissed it as quickly as it came. She turned away, trying to push the encounter out of her mind. Few moments later, just as she was about to pay for what she had bought, a commotion erupted at the front of the store. There was a loud screech of tires, followed by a sickening thud. Cynthia's heart raced as she turned to see what had happened. The woman who had just insulted her lay crumpled on the pavement outside, struck by a speeding car. "Oh my God," Cynthia whispered, her blood running cold. She backed away, her hands trembling. Could it be a coincidence? Could it? She had only thought it, just a fleeting, angry wish. But here it was, playing out before her eyes. She hurried out of the store, not stopping until she was safely in her car. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. This wasn't the first time something like this had occurred. Ever since she found out she was pregnant, strange things had been happening. If she wished harm on someone, it seemed to come true. Cynthia sat on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the wall in front of her. The events of the day weighed heavily on her mind, the disturbing realization that her thoughts, her dark, angry thoughts, had somehow manifested into reality. The incident at the supermarket had left her shaken. A simple, fleeting wish in a moment of frustration had led to the woman being hit by a car. Cynthia couldn't understand it, couldn't comprehend how such a thing could be possible. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at play? Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Ever since she returned from Nigeria, things had been different. The dreams, the strange desires, and now this, was it possible that the ritual with the river priestess had given her some kind of power? A power she didn't understand and couldn't control?